North Africa, 1942. While American forces struggled against Rommel's panzers in the desert, a young engineer was about to break every military regulation in the book. His name was Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Hartwell, and he had just stolen a P-51 Mustang engine from a crashed fighter plane. The jeep sitting in front of him looked impossibly small for what he had in mind. His hands were shaking, not from fear of court-martial, but from something else entirely. "You're going to get us all executed," Sergeant Mike Torres whispered, glancing nervously at the hangar entrance. The workshop smelled of oil and desperation. "They executed my brother for retreating when his engine failed," Jimmy said, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. "Executed him, Mike, for equipment failure. That's not... His transport broke down, left him exposed. The official report called it desertion." Jimmy's jaw clenched. "I'm not letting another soldier die because our machines are too slow." Mike stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. Colonel Harrison already denied your modification request twice. If you do this without authorization, then I'll face the consequences." Jimmy wiped sweat from his forehead with a greasy hand. "But if this works, we'll have something that can actually save lives. And if it doesn't work..." Jimmy didn't answer. He couldn't tell Mike the whole truth, that he'd been diverting fuel allocations, forging requisition forms, and convincing 3 mechanics to help him after hours. Each signature was another nail in his coffin if this failed. "The test run is tomorrow at dawn," Jimmy finally said, "before Harrison's inspection." "Tomorrow?" Mike's eyes widened. "Jimmy, you haven't even finished the cooling system. That engine runs at temperatures that'll melt. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Mike grabbed his shoulder. "Because right now you look like a man with nothing to lose, and that terrifies me." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, footsteps echoed across the compound. Jimmy's hand instinctively moved to cover the engine with a tarp, but it was too late. The hangar door creaked open, and a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Lieutenant Hartwell, we need to talk about your fuel consumption reports." It was Captain Rachel Morrison, the base logistics officer, the same woman who'd been asking too many questions for the past week. The same woman who could end everything with one report to Harrison, and she was staring directly at the half-assembled machine. Jimmy's mind raced. Captain Morrison stood 3 feet away, her expression unreadable in the dim hangar light. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Captain, I can explain..." Jimmy started. "Explain?" She walked slowly around the jeep, her boots clicking against the concrete. "Explain how you've requisitioned enough aviation fuel to run a bomber squadron? Or explain why 3 mechanics missed yesterday's formation?" Mike shifted uncomfortably beside him. The workshop suddenly felt much smaller. "I asked you a question, Lieutenant." Morrison stopped, her eyes fixed on the exposed aircraft engine. "What exactly am I looking at?" Jimmy made a decision. He could lie, delay, deflect, but Morrison wasn't stupid. She'd already connected the dots. "It's a hybrid vehicle," he said. "Jeep chassis, P-51 engine, designed for rapid assault and reconnaissance." "Designed?" Morrison raised an eyebrow. "You mean unauthorized?" "Yes, ma'am. And you thought circumventing the chain of command was appropriate because the chain of command let my brother die." The words exploded out before Jimmy could stop them. "Because we're sending boys out in machines that can't outrun a bicycle, and when those machines fail, we call it cowardice instead of poor engineering." The silence that followed was deafening. Mike closed his eyes. Morrison's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Your brother was Private Daniel Hartwell," she said quietly. "Transport unit. Died 6 months ago." "Executed," Jimmy corrected bitterly, "for desertion when his engine seized." "I read the report." Morrison set her clipboard down on a workbench. "I also read the dissenting opinion from Lieutenant Colonel Peters. He recommended a full investigation into equipment failure." Jimmy blinked. I didn't know there was a dissenting opinion." "It was classified." Morrison moved closer to the jeep, running her hand along the frame. "Peters was overruled by Colonel Harrison. The desertion verdict stood. Why are you telling me this?" Morrison looked up, and for the first time Jimmy saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not anger, but understanding. "Because Peters was my uncle," she said, "and because he died 2 weeks after filing that report. Heart attack, officially. But he'd been receiving threats to drop his investigation." The revelation hit Jimmy like a physical blow. "Harrison—" "I can't prove anything," Morrison said quickly, "but I've been tracking equipment failures across all units under Harrison's command. The patterns are concerning. Substandard parts, maintenance shortcuts, budget diversions." Mike let out a low whistle. "You're saying Harrison's corrupt?" "I'm saying there are questions that need answers." Morrison turned back to Jimmy. "And your modification here, as unauthorized as it is, might be exactly what we need to demonstrate what proper engineering can accomplish." Jimmy felt the ground shifting beneath him. "You want to help? I want justice for the soldiers we've lost, including your brother." Morrison picked up her clipboard again. "But if we're going to do this, we do it smart. Harrison's inspection is tomorrow at 800. That gives us—" She checked her watch. 14 hours. "The cooling system isn't finished," Jimmy admitted. "Then we'd better get to work." Morrison removed her jacket, revealing grease stains on her shirt sleeves. "I didn't spend 2 years in Detroit's auto factories for nothing," Mike grinned. "I like her." "One condition," Morrison added, her voice hardening. "When this works, and it will work, you let me handle Harrison. No cowboy heroics, no emotional confrontations. We build the case properly." "And if it doesn't work?" Jimmy asked. "Then we both face court-martial together." Morrison extended her hand. "Deal?" Jimmy hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. "Deal." "Gee." As Morrison rolled up her sleeves and moved toward the engine compartment, Jimmy realized his secret project had just become something much larger and much more dangerous. He wasn't just building a vehicle anymore. He was building evidence against one of the most powerful officers in the North African theater. The question was whether they'd finish before Harrison discovered what they were doing. The workshop became a controlled chaos of motion. Morrison proved her Detroit credentials within minutes, identifying a cooling system flaw that Jimmy had missed entirely. "You're bleeding hydraulic fluid into the radiator line," she said, pointing at a junction. "At high temperatures, that's catastrophic. I reinforced the seals with rubber gaskets rated for ground vehicles," Morrison interrupted. "Aircraft engines need silicone compounds, different thermal expansion rates." Mike was already rummaging through supply crates. "We don't have silicone gaskets in inventory." "No, but we have silicone sealant in the aircraft repair section." Morrison grabbed a wrench. "We'll manufacture custom gaskets. It'll take 3 hours." Jimmy checked his watch. 247 hours. "That puts us at Aero 100. Then we still need to test the electrical system, balance the drive shaft and pray," Mike added helpfully. They worked in synchronized silence, each person instinctively understanding their role. Morrison's hands moved with practiced precision, her knowledge filling gaps in Jimmy's theoretical engineering. Mike handled the heavy lifting, his strength making quick work of the frame reinforcements. Around midnight, Private First Class Danny Chen appeared at the hangar door, his young face pale with worry. "Lieutenant, we have a problem," Danny said breathlessly. "Colonel Harrison moved his inspection to 600, 2 hours earlier than scheduled." The wrench slipped from Jimmy's hand, clattering against the concrete. "Why?" Morrison demanded. "Didn't say, ma'am, but his aide mentioned something about inventory discrepancies that need immediate attention." Morrison and Jimmy exchanged a loaded glance. Harrison knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious. "That gives us 7 hours, Jimmy calculated, his mind racing. "We can't finish everything." "Then we prioritize," Morrison cut in, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Safety-critical systems only. Engine mounting, cooling, brakes, steering, everything else is secondary." "What about the test run?" Mike asked. Jimmy's stomach knotted. A proper test required at least 2 hours of graduated trials. Low speed, high speed, emergency maneuvers. They'd have time for maybe 30 minutes. "We test at 0530, he decided. 30-minute window. If something fails during Harrison's inspection, at least we'll know it works beforehand. That's cutting it razor thin, Mike muttered. It's all we've got. Danny cleared his throat nervously. There's something else, sir. Captain Morrison, your quarters were searched this evening. Morrison froze mid-motion. Searched? By whom? Military police. On Colonel Harrison's orders. They said it was routine, but... Danny trailed off meaningfully. But Harrison's looking for evidence, Jimmy finished grimly. Evidence that Morrison's been helping me. Did they find anything? Morrison's voice was carefully controlled. No, ma'am, but they took your personal correspondence, letters, journals. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My uncle's letters. The implications crystallized in Jimmy's mind. Peter's dissenting opinion, Morrison's investigation, Harrison's sudden inspection change. This wasn't about an unauthorized modification anymore. This was about silencing anyone who questioned Harrison's command. You need to distance yourself from this project, Jimmy said to Morrison, right now. If Harrison's targeting you, don't be ridiculous. Rachel. Jimmy used her first name for the first time. If they find Peter's letters, if they connect you to this jeep, Harrison will bury you, court-martial for conspiracy, falsifying records, theft of military property. He'll throw everything at you. Let him try. Morrison's eyes flashed with defiance. I've spent 6 months gathering evidence on Harrison's corruption, equipment failures, soldier deaths, falsified reports. Your brother wasn't the only victim, Jimmy. There are at least 17 other cases. 17, Mike breathed. 17 soldiers executed or dishonorably discharged for equipment failures that weren't their fault. Failures that happened because Harrison cut corners to pad his procurement budget. Morrison's voice shook with suppressed rage. And now he knows I'm close to exposing him. The hangar fell silent, except for the distant hum of generators. Danny stood by the door, looking impossibly young and frightened. Mike's expression had hardened into something grim, and Jimmy felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. If we finish this vehicle, he said slowly, and it performs during Harrison's inspection, we prove that proper engineering works, that the equipment failures were preventable. But if it fails, Morrison added, Harrison uses it as evidence that we're reckless, that we wasted resources on a dangerous experiment. He'll spin it to discredit everything we've found. So we don't fail, Mike said simply. Jimmy laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. 7 hours to complete a project that should take 7 weeks. With a corrupt colonel actively trying to sabotage us, no pressure. Morrison picked up her wrench again. Then we'd better stop talking and start working. But as Jimmy returned to the engine compartment, a cold certainty settled in his chest. Harrison hadn't moved the inspection 2 hours earlier by accident. He'd timed it precisely to ensure they couldn't finish. Which meant Harrison already knew about the vehicle, which meant someone in this hangar was feeding him information. Jimmy's hands worked automatically, tightening bolts, connecting fuel lines, double-checking seals, while his mind churned through possibilities. 4 people knew about the project: himself, Mike, Morrison, and Danny. 5, if you counted the 3 mechanics who'd helped earlier, but they'd been transferred to forward positions 3 days ago. Someone was talking. But who? Lieutenant? Danny's voice interrupted his thoughts. Should I stand watch outside? Jimmy studied the young private. Danny Chen, 19 years old, fresh from California. He'd volunteered for every dangerous assignment since arriving in North Africa, as if trying to prove something. His hands trembled slightly, fear or guilt. Yeah, Jimmy said carefully. Alert us if anyone approaches. Danny nodded and disappeared into the darkness outside. The moment he left, Morrison moved closer. You're thinking what I'm thinking, she whispered. That one of us is reporting to Harrison? Jimmy kept his voice low. The timing's too perfect. He moves the inspection right after we accelerate the build schedule. Could be Danny or Mike. Morrison glanced toward where Mike was wrestling with the drive shaft. Or me. Jimmy met her eyes. If it's you, this conversation is pointless. Fair point. A ghost of a smile crossed her face before vanishing. "Mike's been your friend for how long?" 2 years. Since basic training." Jimmy wiped grease from his hands. "He's saved my life twice. I've saved his once. That's the kind of math that's supposed to matter." "Supposed to." "What about Danny?" Morrison frowned. "Clean record. Eager to please. Maybe too eager. Or maybe just young and scared." Jimmy checked his watch. "Je 15 hours. We have 4 hours and 45 minutes. We can either spend it suspecting each other, or we can finish this machine. Those aren't mutually exclusive options." "No," Jimmy admitted. "But paranoia slows us down. Harrison wins either way if we turn on each other." Morrison considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. We work, we watch, we stay sharp." They returned to their tasks, but the atmosphere had changed. Every sound from outside made Jimmy's nerves spike. Every time Mike or Danny moved unexpectedly, his muscles tensed. Trust, the foundation of military cooperation, had developed hairline fractures. By 0300, the cooling system was operational. By 0400, the electrical components were connected. By 0500, with the sky beginning to lighten outside, they'd completed everything except the final engine timing calibration. "We need to test it," Mike announced, straightening up from the chassis. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool desert morning. 15 minutes until test window," Jimmy confirmed. "Danny, bring the vehicle outside." "Mike, you'll drive first, run—" "No!" Morrison interrupted. "I'll drive." Both men stared at her. "If something goes catastrophically wrong," she explained calmly, "better to lose an officer already under suspicion than the engineer who designed it. Besides, I have more high-speed driving experience than either of you. Detroit factories don't count as— I raced stock cars before the war." Morrison's expression dared them to argue. "My uncle taught me. I've handled vehicles at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour. You?" Jimmy and Mike exchanged glances. "Fastest I've gone is maybe 60, Mike admitted. "Settled then." Morrison climbed into the driver's seat before anyone could protest further. The Jeep looked alien now, its frame reinforced with aircraft-grade aluminum, the massive engine dominating the hood, custom exhaust ports venting to both sides. Danny pushed the vehicle outside manually, the engine still cold and silent. The desert pre-dawn was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that preceded either disaster or miracle. "Ignition sequence," Jimmy called out, his heart hammering. "Battery first, then fuel pump, then—" Morrison was already moving through the checklist with professional efficiency. The fuel pump whined to life. Battery gauges flickered green. She adjusted the choke and throttle mixture. "Contact," she said calmly, and turned the ignition. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the aircraft engine roared to life with a sound like thunder being born. The entire vehicle shuddered, the frame shaking despite the reinforcements. The noise was deafening, a deep, primal bellow that echoed across the compound and probably woke every soldier within a mile radius. Morrison's grin was fierce and triumphant. She gunned the throttle experimentally, and the engine's pitch climbed to a shriek. Even at idle, the Jeep seemed to vibrate with barely contained violence. "Cooling system!" Jimmy shouted over the noise. Mike checked the gauges. "Stable! Temperature rising, but within parameters. Oil pressure. Green!" Morrison released the brake, and the Jeep lurched forward with shocking acceleration. She navigated the vehicle in a wide circle around the hangar, gradually increasing speed. 30 miles per hour, 50, 70. The Jeep moved with a power and agility that seemed almost supernatural. Then Morrison hit the straightaway and opened the throttle completely. The vehicle didn't just accelerate, it launched. In the growing dawn light, Jimmy watched in awe as the hybrid machine hit speeds no Jeep had ever achieved. 90 miles per hour, 100, 110. The roar of the engine became a constant scream of mechanical fury. Morrison executed a hard turn, the Jeep's enhanced suspension keeping it stable through G-forces that would have flipped a normal vehicle. She brought it back around, downshifting smoothly, and pulled to a controlled stop exactly where she'd started. The engine idled with a predatory growl. Morrison's face was flushed with adrenaline, her eyes bright. "Gentlemen," she said. "We have successfully created something magnificent." But Jimmy wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, toward the main road leading to the compound, where Colonel Harrison's staff car was approaching, headlights cutting through the morning haze. He'd arrived 30 minutes early, and he'd just witnessed everything. Colonel Harrison stepped out of his staff car with the deliberate slowness of a man who held all the cards. 2 military police officers flanked him, hands resting on their sidearms. The morning sun caught the silver eagles on Harrison's shoulders, making them gleam like weapons. "Lieutenant Hartwell," Harrison's voice carried across the compound with parade ground precision. "I see you've been busy." Jimmy's mind raced through options. Lie, impossible. Harrison had just watched the test run. Deflect, pointless, confess. That meant court-martial. But staying silent might be worse. "Sir, I can explain." "Can you?" Harrison walked slowly around the idling vehicle, his expression unreadable. "Because from where I'm standing, I see multiple violations. Unauthorized modification of military property, theft of aircraft components, misappropriation of fuel resources. And, his eyes found Morrison. Conspiracy involving an officer under investigation. Morrison climbed out of the jeep, but said nothing. Her face had gone carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "Shut it down," Harrison ordered, gesturing at the engine. Jimmy reached for the ignition and the thunder died, leaving only silence and the tick of cooling metal. "You know what bothers me most?" Harrison continued, circling back to face them. "It's not the insubordination. It's not even the theft, though that's court-martial material right there. It's the arrogance, the sheer presumption that you know better than the entire military procurement system." "With respect, sir," Jimmy started, "I didn't give you permission to speak, Lieutenant." Harrison's voice turned to ice. "Your brother's execution was lawful and justified. He abandoned his post during combat operations. The fact that you've spent 6 months nursing a grudge and wasting military resources on some misguided revenge project tells me everything I need to know about your fitness for command." The words hit Jimmy like physical blows, but before he could respond, Morrison stepped forward. "Colonel, if I may—" "Captain Morrison." Harrison turned his attention to her like a predator selecting prey. "I've been reviewing your service record. Exemplary, really. Right up until your uncle started making unfounded accusations about equipment failure rates. Funny how you followed in his footsteps." Sir, the data supports..." "The data supports that soldiers in combat situations sometimes make poor decisions under pressure," Harrison interrupted. "That's not a procurement failure. That's human nature." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Your uncle understood that eventually. After we had several conversations about the damage his conspiracy theories were causing to unit morale." Morrison's hands clenched into fists, but her voice remained steady. "Those weren't theories. They were documented cases of soldiers who failed." Harrison's expression hardened. "Just like Lieutenant Hartwell's brother failed. Just like you're both failing right now by refusing to accept reality." Mike had been standing silently nearby, but now he spoke up. "Colonel, permission to—" "Sergeant Torres, you're dismissed," Harrison snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "But sir, that's an order." Mike looked at Jimmy, conflict clear on his face. Jimmy gave him a slight nod. There was no point in all of them going down. Mike saluted stiffly and walked away, leaving Jimmy and Morrison alone with Harrison and his MPs. "Here's what's going to happen," Harrison said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "This abomination," he gestured at the jeep, "will be dismantled immediately, every component catalogued, every regulation you broke documented. You'll both face general court-martial for theft, insubordination, and conspiracy to defraud the United States military, and the 17 other soldiers." Morrison's voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "The ones who died because of substandard equipment purchased at inflated prices. What happens to them?" Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition that Morrison knew too much. I have no idea what you're talking about. I think you do, Morrison continued. I think you've been skimming procurement budgets for months, buying inferior parts, pocketing the difference, and covering it up by blaming soldiers when the equipment fails. My uncle figured it out. That's why he had to die. The accusation hung in the air like a detonation. The two MPs shifted uncomfortably. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those are serious accusations, Captain, he said softly. Borderline treasonous. I hope you have proof. I have enough. Where? Harrison smiled without warmth. In your quarters? Oh, wait. We searched those last night. Found some interesting letters from your uncle. Lots of paranoid rambling about phantom conspiracies. Very sad, really. The stress of command clearly affected his judgment toward the end. Morrison's face went pale, but she held her ground. Harrison turned to the MPs. Place Captain Morrison under arrest. Charges, conspiracy, theft of military property, and insubordination. Lieutenant Hartwell as well. Escort them both to the brig. The MPs moved forward reluctantly. Jimmy felt handcuffs close around his wrists, cold metal against his skin. This was it. Everything he'd worked for, destroyed. His brother's name would never be cleared. Morrison's investigation would die with her career. But as the MPs started to lead them away, something unexpected happened. A second vehicle approached, a transport truck carrying a familiar face. Lieutenant Colonel Peters had been Harrison's superior. But Peters was dead, Morrison had said. A heart attack 2 weeks after challenging Harrison. So why was he climbing out of that truck, very much alive, with a folder thick with documents? And why were 3 other officers with him, wearing the insignia of the Inspector General's office? Harrison's confident expression cracked for just a moment, a hairline fracture in perfect composure. He recovered quickly, but Jimmy had seen it. Fear. Lieutenant Colonel Peters, Harrison said smoothly, I wasn't expecting you until... I'm sure you weren't. Peters cut him off, his voice carrying the weight of authority. He was older than Jimmy expected, maybe late 50s, with grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. Release those 2 immediately. The MPs hesitated, looking between Harrison and Peters. Sir, with respect, Harrison said, these officers have committed serious violations. I said release them. Peters' tone left no room for argument. The MPs unlocked the handcuffs immediately. Peters approached Morrison, studying her face intently. You look like your mother, he said quietly. She'd be proud of what you've done here. Uncle Robert? Morrison's voice wavered with disbelief. But I was told you died of a heart attack? Peters smiled grimly. That was the official story. In reality, I've spent the last 6 weeks working with the Inspector General's office, building an airtight case against Colonel Harrison. He opened the folder he carried, revealing page after page of documents, financial records, procurement orders. 17 soldiers dead or dishonorably discharged due to equipment failures, over $200,000 in fraudulent procurement contracts. Falsified maintenance records, intimidation of subordinate officers, and, Peters looked directly at Harrison, attempted murder of a superior officer who discovered the scheme. Harrison's face had gone pale. This is absurd. You demand nothing, Peters interrupted coldly. We have testimony from 3 defense contractors you bribed. We have bank records showing payments to offshore accounts. We have maintenance logs you altered. And we have intercepted communications from this morning when you ordered your aide to sabotage Lieutenant Hartwell's test vehicle. Jimmy's blood ran cold. Sabotage. He looked at the jeep, suddenly seeing it differently. What if something had failed during Morrison's test run? What if the brakes had malfunctioned? Or the steering, or... Your aide confessed 30 minutes ago, Peters continued. Private Chen detailed how you pressured him to report on Morrison's activities and to introduce a coolant leak that would cause catastrophic engine failure during high-speed operation. Danny. The traitor had been Danny all along. Jimmy felt a mix of relief. It wasn't Mike, and fury at the betrayal. The only reason that leak didn't work, Peter said, is because Captain Morrison rebuilt the entire cooling system last night. Her Detroit training saved your lives." Morrison closed her eyes briefly, processing how close they'd come to disaster. Harrison's composure was crumbling. "I want my lawyer. I'm entitled to—" "You're entitled to exactly what those 17 soldiers got," Peters said. "A fair trial followed by appropriate consequences." He nodded to the IG officers. "Take him into custody." As Harrison was led away in handcuffs, the rising sun caught his insignia one last time. The eagles that had seemed so threatening minutes ago now looked like cheap metal. Peters turned to Jimmy and Morrison. "I owe you both an apology. I should have acted sooner, moved more decisively. If I had, Private Daniel Hartwell might still be alive." The use of his brother's full name hit Jimmy unexpectedly. "Sir, Your brother was a good soldier," Peters said firmly. "His execution was a miscarriage of justice orchestrated by a corrupt officer. That verdict will be overturned. His record will be cleared posthumously, and his family will receive full benefits and an official apology from the Department of War." Jimmy felt something crack inside his chest. Grief and relief, mixing into something overwhelming. He'd carried his brother's shame for 6 months, believing everyone saw Daniel as a coward. Now that burden lifted, and the sudden lightness was almost painful. "As for this," Peters gestured at the hybrid jeep, "I'm told it just demonstrated capabilities far beyond standard reconnaissance vehicles." "It did, sir," Morrison confirmed. "Top speed 115 miles per hour, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, operational range of 400 miles with current fuel load." "Impressive." Peters walked around the vehicle, examining it with genuine interest. "Lieutenant Hartwell, how long would it take to build 5 more? Jimmy blinked in surprise. "Sir, 5 more vehicles, modified to your specifications. The Inspector General's office has authorized a special projects budget for advanced reconnaissance development. If your design proves viable in field conditions, we'll expand production. I'd need a proper workshop, a team, at least 3 months for 5 vehicles." "You have 2 months and whatever resources you need," Peters said. "Captain Morrison will serve as your logistics officer. Sergeant Torres will command the test unit once vehicles are operational." Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't this go through normal procurement channels? After what we've just uncovered, do you really trust normal procurement channels?" Peters raised an eyebrow. "No. This project stays small, stays secret, and stays with people I know I can trust. You've proven yourselves." He pulled out 2 folders, handing one to each of them. "Your new orders. You're both transferred to Special Projects Division, reporting directly to my office. Classification, top secret. As of this moment, you don't exist in standard command structures." Jimmy opened his folder, seeing official reassignment papers bearing the War Department's seal. This was real. They weren't being punished. They were being promoted into something beyond normal military hierarchy. "One more thing," Peters added. "I need a name for this vehicle. The official designation is SPV-1, but soldiers always nickname their machines. What are you calling it?" Jimmy and Morrison exchanged glances. They'd been so focused on building it, they'd never discussed naming it. "The Hellcat," Morrison said suddenly. "Fast, aggressive, and underestimated until it strikes." Peters considered this, then nodded. "The Hellcat, I like it. Make me 5 more by the end of October, Lieutenant. And Captain," he turned to Morrison, "keep that evidence file safe. Harrison won't be the last corrupt officer we uncover, and your investigation methods are exactly what the IG's office needs." "Yes, sir." As Peters and his team departed, leaving Jimmy and Morrison standing beside their creation in the golden desert morning, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. "We did it," Morrison said quietly. "We actually did it." Jimmy looked at the Hellcat, the machine that had started as revenge and become something more, something that might actually change how wars were fought. "My brother would have liked this," he said. "He always said the best soldiers were the ones who refused to accept failure as inevitable." He was right. Morrison placed a hand on the Jeep's hood, still warm from the test run. "And now his name will be cleared. That matters, Jimmy. Yeah. Jimmy's throat tightened. It really does. Behind them, Mike appeared, jogging across the compound with an expression of barely contained excitement. Is it true? Did Peters really authorize? 5 more Hellcats, Morrison confirmed. You're going to command the first operational unit. Mike's whoop of joy echoed across the desert, startling a nearby patrol. For the first time in months, Jimmy felt himself genuinely smile. The war was far from over, but they'd won something important today, not just vindication or survival, but proof that innovation and integrity could triumph over corruption. And somewhere out there, in whatever place soldiers went after death, maybe Danny Hartwell was smiling too. Oh, 2 months later, October 1942. The workshop had transformed from a secret hangar into a legitimate military facility. 6 Hellcats sat in various stages of completion, their aircraft engines gleaming under industrial lights. A hand-picked team of 12 mechanics worked around the clock, each one personally vetted by Peters to ensure loyalty and competence. Jimmy stood at his drafting table, reviewing improvements for the Mark II design. Enhanced suspension, better weight distribution, armor plating for the driver's compartment. Each iteration made the vehicle more lethal and more survivable. "Lieutenant," a young corporal approached nervously. "Colonel Peters is here for the final inspection." Jimmy set down his pencil. This was it, the moment that determined whether the Hellcat program expanded or died. 5 vehicles had to perform perfectly under combat simulation conditions. Anything less meant failure. Outside, Peters had arrived with a full contingent of brass, generals, admirals, procurement officers. They stood in a precise line, expressions ranging from skeptical to curious. The military establishment didn't easily embrace innovation, especially from junior officers. Morrison was already there, dressed in formal uniform, her captain's bars recently upgraded to major's insignia. The promotion had been Peters' doing, recognition for her investigation work that had already uncovered 2 more corruption cases in other theaters. "Lieutenant Hartwell," Peters said formally, "are your vehicles ready for demonstration?" "Yes, sir." Jimmy signaled to Mike, who stood beside the lead Hellcat with 4 other drivers, all volunteers who'd trained intensively for this moment. "Proceed." The 5 engines roared to life simultaneously, creating a sound like rolling thunder. The generals winced at the volume. Good. Intimidation was part of the design. Mike led the formation through a series of maneuvers, high-speed runs, precision turns, emergency braking, obstacle courses. The Hellcats moved like predators, their enhanced power and handling evident in every motion. Then came the combat simulation, racing through simulated enemy fire while maintaining formation, executing tactical retreats at speeds no normal jeep could manage, demonstrating how these vehicles could insert reconnaissance teams deep into enemy territory and extract them before hostile forces could respond. The display lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, the 5 Hellcats formed a perfect line in front of the assembled officers, engines idling with barely restrained power. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then one of the generals, a 3-star with a chest full of ribbons, stepped forward. "Lieutenant, what's your production timeline if we authorize full-scale manufacture?" Jimmy's heart rate spiked. Full-scale manufacture. He'd expected maybe 20 vehicles, tops. "Sir, with proper facilities and personnel, we could produce approximately 50 vehicles per month. That's assuming dedicated manufacturing lines and consistent parts supply." 50 per month, the general repeated, exchanging glances with his peers. "And training time for drivers? 4 weeks for basic operation, 8 weeks for combat-ready proficiency." The general walked around the lead Hellcat, running his hand along the reinforced frame. "You understand what you've created here, Lieutenant? This isn't just a fast jeep. This is a revolution in rapid assault doctrine. Small units with overwhelming speed and firepower, hitting enemy positions before they can coordinate defense." "Yes, sir. That was the intention. The Germans won't know what hit them." The general turned to Peters. I want production authorization on my desk by tomorrow morning. Priority clearance, unlimited budget. And I want this young man," he pointed at Jimmy, "promoted to captain and assigned as chief engineer for the entire program." Peters smiled. "Already drafted the orders, sir." "Good." The general faced Jimmy directly. "Captain Hartwell, you've done something remarkable. Your brother would be proud." The words caught Jimmy off guard. He'd spent months fighting to clear Daniel's name, but he hadn't expected recognition to feel this way. Not triumphant, but quietly painful, because Daniel wasn't here to see it. "Thank you, sir," Jimmy managed. As the brass departed to file their reports, Morrison approached with an envelope. "This came for you, from Washington." Jimmy opened it, recognizing official War Department letterhead. His hands trembled slightly as he read, "Private Daniel Hartwell's court-martial verdict has been overturned. His death has been reclassified as killed in action. Full honors will be awarded posthumously, including the Bronze Star for valor during the action in which he lost his life. His name will be inscribed on the memorial at Arlington National Cemetery." Below the official text, someone had handwritten a note. "Your brother was a hero who died because his equipment failed him. You've ensured that failure won't happen to others. Well done. General George C. Marshall." Jimmy folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket next to his heart. "You okay?" Morrison asked quietly. "Yeah." Jimmy looked at the 5 Hellcats, machines born from grief and determination, now becoming instruments of victory. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Mike joined them, still grinning from the successful demonstration. "So, Captain Hartwell, sounds good, doesn't it? What's next?" "Next?" Jimmy considered the question. The Hellcat program was approved. Daniel's name was cleared. Harrison was awaiting trial. Justice had been served, and innovation had triumphed, but the war wasn't over. Soldiers were still dying, and there were more machines to build, more improvements to design, more lives to save. "Next, we build 50 more," Jimmy said. "And then 50 after that. We keep building until every reconnaissance unit has the tools they need to come home alive." "Ambitious," Morrison observed. "Necessary," Jimmy corrected. "I made my brother a promise. Every vehicle we build honors that promise." As the sun set over the North African desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the 3 of them stood beside the machines that had changed everything. The Hellcats sat silent now, their engines cooling, but their presence spoke to something larger, proof that individual determination could reshape military doctrine, that innovation could emerge from tragedy, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't firepower, but the refusal to accept failure as inevitable. History would record the Hellcat program as a tactical innovation that influenced armored vehicle design for decades. But for Jimmy, it would always be something more personal. A promise kept to a brother who deserved better, and a testament to every soldier whose death had been blamed on their courage when the real failure was in the machines they'd been given. The war would continue for 3 more years. The Hellcats would serve in every theater, from Europe to the Pacific, earning a reputation that made enemy forces retreat at the sound of their engines. Dozens of variations would follow: armored versions, weapons platforms, medical evacuation vehicles. But it all started here, in a secret hangar in North Africa, when a grief-stricken engineer refused to accept that his brother died a coward and proved that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to save the living.